So NASA does a really good job, I think, of training humans how to live and work in space. But there's some things they never tell you. I couldn't figure out why didn't they tell us this. I think I know now why. Some of it's scary stuff. One of the most popular questions, I speak to elementary school kids a good bit, and one of the more popular questions is, were you ever scared? And it's like, well, yeah, we were scared. We're all scared. We don't talk about it much, but yes, we were scared at times. One of the times I think about the most is my very first spacewalk. So when we do a spacewalk from the space station, there's two of us always. You always have a buddy when you go out. And you start out from an airlock. And the airlock is sort of shaped like a soda can, a little bit bigger, but not much. You and your spacewalking buddy have your spacesuits on. You've got your backpacks on. That's your life support system. And you're crammed in there head to toe so that when they closed the hatch, all I could see was my spacewalking buddy's feet. Now, the reason why they put us in this tiny spot is we're going to open the door into space, and you don't want all the space station atmosphere to go rushing out and it'd kill everybody. So it's just us, and we open just the hatch just to that little volume, and a little bit of air gets out. And we can start our spacewalk. What nobody told me, though, was how beautiful it was inside this little airlock. We've got our spacewalking tools. They're floating around. They're tethered to us. We're going to bring them outside, but they're floating around. They're banging on this aluminum hull of the airlock and into each other, and they ring at a certain frequency because they're not laying on a surface, something you'd never experience on the ground here. So we got these chimes going off all around us, which was really nice until what we have to do, my partner opens the valve to rush all of the air in the airlock out into space. So when that happens, the air leaves, the sound starts to go, it starts to get quieter and quieter. Our spacesuits start to puff up, get stiffer until they become like armor. It gets harder to move around, and then it's total silence. All I could hear was my own breathing and a little fan going off. The feeling that gives you is like, wow, that never happened in a simulator. This is serious stuff. Spacewalking is one of the three most dangerous things we do. We launch, we land, and do spacewalks, and that's one of those things. So I'm going to come back to that. I was probably the last person you'd think would be an astronaut. I'm a child of the 60s. I'm the youngest of 7 kids. Usually astronauts are the oldest, typically kind of the quote-unquote leaders of the family. I was very shy. I wore glasses. I had a lot of allergies, a little bit of asthma, scared of math, and scared of the outdoors, and scared of heights. So that's how I started out. Now, what I found out was, in early teens, was that something that's scary actually becomes really interesting when you take a close look at it. Just open the hatch maybe a little bit and stick your head out. It becomes very interesting, and I found a lot of joy in finding the interesting things and those things that scared me the most. So fast forward, I had the opportunity to become an astronaut. I've had the chance to fly on 3 different spacecraft: the space shuttle, the Soyuz, which is launching on a Soyuz rocket out of Kazakhstan. It's the Russian way to space, if you will. And then the SpaceX Dragon capsule, which sits on the Falcon 9, launching out of Florida. On launch day, a lot of people think, okay, so that's a scary thing, right? Launching into space. And actually, it's not. Probably because we're just so excited to be flying in space. It's pinnacle of your career in a lot of ways. And so it's probably, if there's any fear, it's just all mixed up and overshadowed by the intense excitement of being in space. But you get inside the capsule. I flew with 6 crewmates on the shuttle. I had 2 other crewmates in the Soyuz and 3 others in the Dragon. And it's just your little team, your little crew are encapsulated at the top of a rocket. They close the hatch. You're the only ones, once the crew closes the hatch and they're gone, you're the only ones within a 3-mile radius, because that's called the blast zone, and no one else wants to be there, and we're just sitting right in the middle of it. And you have your little atmosphere here. You have about 2.5 hours maybe to be waiting for the rocket to go up, but you begin to hear things. We're lying there in our couches, and you hear a bang, and that's a valve opening up to either start airflow into your capsule or to mix it up. On the Dragon, you start to hear, they fill the rocket up after you've gotten in, so you hear this waterfall behind you. It sounds like a waterfall. And we look at each other and go, well, that wasn't in the simulator. Why didn't they tell us about this? But again, that's when you start to realize this is really serious, something that's about to happen. You can hear the countdown on the launch. You can't hear much anything else because you got your headset on, inside your helmet, in your spacesuit, in your capsule. But you can hear the Launch Control Center starting the countdown. The excitement builds up. Just before you get to 0, you hear the rocket start. Have you ever watched one of those dinosaur movies where this giant T-Rex is screaming in the face of some hapless, character in the movie? And that's kind of what it sounds like. You are listening to this thing. It's this dry animal, hoarse roar, scream really, that's going off behind you. And the weird thing is that it doesn't stop. It just keeps going and going. It doesn't stop to take another breath. It just keeps going. And then the bolts go or the clamps go, and you get a concussion in your chest, and the rocket starts to go up. The 3 rockets are very different in that regard. The shuttle was this loud rattling. And when we did the roll program, which is when they flip the shuttle around so the antennas can talk to the ground on the East Coast as you're going up, then it can point in the right direction. You do that roll, and some of my crewmates just shouted with joy because it's such a fun thing to be flipping around like that. Much smoother in the Dragon and in the Soyuz, just this push still with a loud rattle and a loud hum around you. You can read a display, you can read something, but you can't write at all. It's just shaking too much. What's uniquely different about all 3 is the staging. So staging is when you drop off the empty part, the empty tanks of the rocket, and light the next rocket to it's full of fuel still and keep on going. On the shuttle, that sounds like a loud bang. The solid rocket boosters come flying off. In the Soyuz, that was the most exciting. We were looking out the window at about 250,000 feet, and just huge explosion outside, sparks everywhere that are even flying ahead of us in the window, but then we just punch through all that and keep accelerating past the sparks. The Dragon was very smooth, completely different. When that first stage stopped, we just lofted. There was no engine really firing at that second. But then the MVAC, they call it, the next stage engine, starts to light and gently pushes you up to get to orbit. Now, you may know this, but to go from 0 miles per hour to get into orbit, you have to accelerate to 17,500 miles an hour. That's how fast you have to go to stay in space, to stay in orbit. And we do that in about 8.5 minutes on a rocket. That's so you can get out of the atmosphere and get going really fast. So after that, it's just physics. And you just feel 4 G's of pressure, so 4 times the force of gravity on your chest. Your arms feel welded to your chest. Your legs get sucked up behind you. Even your cheeks feel and your lips feel heavy as you're being pushed up. You can only take your breath in little sips. But then, when that 8.5 minutes is done, again, it's all the same across all the rockets. The engine stops, complete silence, and all you can hear is a little fan running, and you might see a pencil just lazily floating in front of you. And then you know you've reached space. When we get to the space station, again, things that they don't tell you. We dock to the space station, maybe in 4 hours, maybe in a couple of days before we get there. We're 250 miles, we're in orbit, up above, above the surface of the Earth, we're in orbit. Open the hatch, and there's your crewmates. They've been waiting for you. They've been there maybe 2 or 3 months, because they were taking care of the station until we got there. There's this loud rush of sound of the fans. There's a lot of noise in this station of the fan noise. You get used to it, but that's to keep all the avionics cool, to keep the CO2 blown away from our faces. But when you float in there, it's a familiar space because we've been in simulators training for years, but the weird thing about it is all the clutter. It's a laboratory. There are wires and cables everywhere. Your brain just cannot take in all of that complexity and detail all at once. The other strange thing is you are floating. And so you come out into this very familiar space station, but you can't find a place to put your feet. And then you start to move and say, okay, that I've got down. I can move. I just can't stop. Well, now I need a plan on how I'm going to land. But you start to turn. So you might hit the other wall with your back or with your butt or with your head. And it takes a while before you can get to where you can even learn how to stabilize yourself. I don't remember what it was like when I was born, but I imagine it felt something like this. Because when you get to space, you got to learn how to put on your pants. You got to learn how to eat. how to go to the bathroom, how to brush your teeth, how to do all those things. Speaking of scary stuff, learning how to go to the bathroom is one of the things that actually scares astronauts the most. We actually, pre-flight, get together with those who've been there before and those who haven't, and have a very private huddle and talk about, okay, here in detail, this is what you do. It's a very steep learning curve. You're an expert after the first time. Eating in space is a lot of fun. Turns out tortillas have this great aerodynamic quality about them, and you can throw them like Frisbees across the module. M&Ms are great for the same reason. But the scariest thing about it is if astronauts talk about what they're scared of, living on the space station, it's really messing up. We are taking care of literally billions of dollars worth of equipment. We are the very last step in millions of steps for hundreds of thousands of scientists around the world. This is their data. We're collecting their data. We're completing their experiment in space. You know, in the 1960s, it was a frightening thing to go into space. As a child of the 60s, I remember very well hearing stories about, wow, we might see aliens up there. We might bring back bacteria from the moon that'll kill the rest of humanity. We might lose astronauts that are going to be, off in space forever. And yet our country got over that with great interest and with a lot of work and a lot of detail. Attention to detail got us to this point where now we have this orbiting laboratory. It's been up there 23 years. There has been a constant human presence for 23 years now up there. And I had the chance to be a part of that team for just a short amount of time. So what are we doing right now? What have we done? Again, I think it's kind of scary. People ask, have you seen any UFOs? And say, no, I haven't, but I have seen alien life forms, and that's me and my crewmates. Things happen to the human body that have never happened in human evolution ever. With the fluid shifts that go on, with the radiation hits we get, we're finding out that our muscles and our bones atrophy at an accelerated rate. We can get blood clots. Our eyes can change in some somewhat disturbing ways. And so with great intensity, we are studying ourselves to see if there's anything in there we can understand that would help people with diseases that have similar effects on people on Earth. What's very interesting, you've heard some of this already today, some of that research is going on in space where you can take little parts of humans, tissue equivalents, or I like to say little tiny human representatives perhaps, that get up there, a little collection of cells that in space can actually grow bigger because there's no gravity tearing them apart, get a whole array of them and start injecting drugs through them to see what drug is going to kill the cells and what drug is going to help them. Turns out cancer cells grow very fast. Without the break of gravity on them, they grow at an accelerated pace, which is actually good for studying, again, how to kill them without killing the normal human cells. We are even on the verge of being able to, without any deformation from gravity, to be able to print, build, grow larger structures in the microgravity of space. There's a lot of other research that goes on up there. Is the research going to be the greatest legacy from spaceflight? I'm not quite sure about that, and let me explain. So one of the most popular questions I get is, what does the Earth look like from space? And I like to answer, well, first of all, understand what space looks like from space. I was completely floored by this. I really dug into my subconscious. When you look at the blackness of space, it's not like a wall that's painted black or a black curtain. It's actually a real three-dimensional, almost palpable, oily blackness. It's the most alien thing I've ever seen. I can't imagine being, for instance, on my way to Mars, leaving Earth, and NASA wants to do that in the 30s and the 40s, and not even knowing what's up, down, what's forward or backwards, completely lost in that complete blackness. I'm reminded of a quote from Nietzsche, and I'll paraphrase, saying, you look into the abyss and the abyss looks back at you. And that's what kind of grabbed me. On the night of my first spacewalk, after my first spacewalk, I had a dream that I had no spacesuit on, just my little flight suit. I was in the airlock, opened the hatch, and I did a swan dive out into space. Did a very nice pike position dive, but went off forever into space. That's the degree to which it affected me. So back to the airlock. Dave and I were getting ready to go out in space. The airlock hatch was right in front of me. I was going to open it up. You open it up by grabbing the handle, and it's almost like churning a vat or something. You spin the handle around, it pops up, and you can slide it up. Fortunately, when I opened the hatch, I didn't have to take everything in at once on my first spacewalk because it was nighttime. There are 16 sunsets and sunrises for us in space. That's how fast we're going around the Earth, 16 times per day. We happened to open the hatch and start our walk at nighttime. So I just slipped out of the hatch, and all I could see were my headlamps illuminating my hands and the handrail, nothing else until Dave came out, and the light was reflecting off of Dave. And we were able to check each other out, check out our spacesuits. We spent a lot of time getting ready to do this. So we made our last little checks. We don't feel anything else around us. We're just kind of floating there. But then with the simple attention to just what I knew well, that is my hands and what I could do with my hands, opening and closing on that handrail, not thinking about what was or wasn't around me, was able to get out the hatch and get going. And that's what we train new astronauts to do. Because this is what's coming up. What's coming up is the sun's going to rise, and you're going to find yourself hanging on that airlock. And again, you just go back to just looking at your hands, taking it in small spaces, and to begin to translate across the space station. And we're able to do some effective work while we're out there. So another popular question, or to answer the question, what does the Earth look like from space? It's a little bit surprising at first. You don't know what you're looking at. It's not like you have borders and an atlas to stare at with names. Sometimes you don't even know, are we over land or the ocean? I don't know. Is that clouds or are those glaciers? Hard to tell. But you get to where you come to that really enjoyable situation of, after a couple of months of looking out the window and saying, hey, that land is red, we're over Australia right now, or that's granite, that must be Canada. And you really get to know your Earth very well, the way it really looks. Another popular question is, what did you enjoy the most? What is your greatest memory of being in space? Certainly it's this, looking out the window, but with the caveat, and that is doing it with someone else, with one of your crewmates. You come back from space actually with really not anything at all. All you've got is your memories, some photos, and some videos. But after 18 years of being an astronaut, what I remember the most, what I value the most, is the time that I spent with my crewmates looking at the Earth outside the cupola. Now, when asked, what did you learn from it? Did it change your life? Well, certainly, I think if all of us were in space, we saw the Earth the way it really looks, yes. You see that little thin slip of atmosphere, it's almost nothing. It's paper thin. It's bright and it's beautiful, but boy, is it thin. You see the immensity of the Earth, but still, it's off in the vastness of space. The Earth seems fragile, but we seem more fragile still. You don't see any evidence of human habitation while you're in space. You need a telephoto lens to see it. At night, you can see cities. That's it. That's the most prominent view of people on the Earth. As you go over oceans, and at the nighttime, you realize we're not populating much of the Earth because most of the Earth is oceans anyway. So indeed, we seem very fragile. Some people have said, well, doesn't that make it seem insignificant? And we've worked it out. We talk amongst ourselves quite a bit. My opinion is we become that much more significant, and the Earth itself so much more significant because it is so fragile and so rare and precious. So what have I learned from being in space? You know, we go through life carrying a lot of burdens and having these fears. Certainly, there are many people who have greater burdens, greater fears than what astronauts go through flying in space. Of that, I'm sure. But what I'd like to do is to always live, since I've been up in space and to come back, take that sense of wonder and awe and keep it in my life every day, that as beautiful as the Earth is up there, all the minutia of the Earth that we live with every day is just as beautiful. And I hope I'm always appreciating the sand that's beneath my feet, the wind in my hair, the trees around me, and probably more importantly, the people that I share it with. If we are all together like a spaceflight crew looking out the window, I hope we can all share that awe, no matter what we're dealing with, share that awe and wonder, and overcome the fear that comes with the responsibility of protecting each other and the fear of the vulnerability that we need to express in order to connect with each other, because that is really the most important thing. Thank you.